everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers Podcast. I am Jody Grunwald. On this week's episode, my guest is Stacey Abate. This guest truly helps create incredible changes for the organizations that she works with. Imagine being a grants professional working with nonprofit organizations and helping them to garner over $60 million in funding from foundations and government agencies. That is an incredible amount of change and support. Stacey is a staff writer for RWJ Barnabas Health, has had her own grants consulting firm since 2000, and was the founding president of the Grants Professionals Association New Jersey chapter. Stacey teaches grant writing at Rutgers University and shares her expertise and change-making skills with the next generation of nonprofit professionals. Prior to grant writing, she was an interpreter and teacher of the deaf. Listen in to hear how her schooling led her down an interesting path, the incredible places she has lived along her journey, how she is on a mission to raise as much as she can to help nonprofit organizations, or as I say, for impact organizations in New Jersey, grow their programming. You can find Stacey on LinkedIn if you have any questions for her. On March 24th, Today is the Day is launching the inaugural International Changemakers Forum called Challenge Yourself, Disrupt the Status Quo. With 3 CNN heroes, TEDx speakers, 6 authors, a former FBI agent, executive producer and writer of a TV show, CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, and more sharing their expertise on topics that matter. Thank you to Investors Bank for being the Catalyst for Change sponsor, and to the NJBIA for being a scholarship sponsor of the event. Sponsorships are available and can help you and your organization share your mission and information with both a local and broader audience. To purchase tickets and to learn more, go to todayisthedayliveit.com. And don't forget, subscribe to the Today is the Day Changemakers YouTube channel, comment, like, and share, stream on all streaming sites, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Today is the Day Live It. The views expressed by all Today is the Day Changemakers podcast guests are their own. Their appearance on the Today is the Day Changemakers podcast does not imply any endorsement of them or any entity that they represent. Have a great week, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. I am Jody Grunwald, and as I say every single week for the last many weeks, I have the most incredible and wonderful guests that join me who are changemakers in their corner of the world and beyond. And today I want to welcome Stacey Abate. Hi, Stacey. How are you?
Fine, thanks, Jody. How are you?
I am good. I am good. And, you know, the power of the internet is incredible because that's how I met Stacey. I was working for the NJBIA as their statewide not-for-profit consultant. And I was looking for someone who could share information, incredible information with the statewide group. And lo and behold, Google is such an incredible force. I Googled and there came up Stacey's name. So I'm just going to read a little bit about your bio, and then we're going to get into some great conversation. So since becoming a grants professional in 1997, Stacey has raised approximately, I'm going to say this twice, probably 60 million. That is 60 million from all types of foundations and government agencies. Stacey is a staff writer for RWJ Barnabas Health, has had her own grants consulting firm since 2000, and was the founding president of the Grants Professional Association in the New Jersey chapter. Stacey joined Rutgers University in 2016 to teach grant writing and share her expertise with the next generation of nonprofit professionals. And prior to grant writing, she was an interpreter and teacher of the deaf, which I didn't know, Stacey, until I read your bio. So pretty incredible stuff.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So it was, like I said, it was incredible. I reached out to you. You spoke on the NJBIA meeting, and then we've done a couple of things since then, become friends, and I learned something new about you every single time we have a conversation. So that teacher of the deaf. So I want to get to that, but before we do, let's go backwards. I always go backwards with my guests and talk about where you grew up, where you lived, what type of child you were as a child. Were you quiet? Were you outgoing? Because I always think it's incredible the journey that we all take.
So I'm actually from here. We're in New Jersey. I'm from Monmouth County. My younger brother is deaf, which will make things a little clearer for you. But that didn't strike me so unusual. I mean, I knew everybody's brother wasn't deaf, but it didn't seem like that big of a deal. And there was the two of us. My parents were married. It was just, you're very typical. I'm a very typical older child. Eldest child, if you've done any of the reading into birth order, I like things very, very detailed and oriented, and I have control issues. But everything here in Monmouth County, at the time I was in Monmouth County, was great. I went to Rutgers for my undergraduate. Under protest, that was actually the only school my parents agreed to pay for. And it's not where I wanted to go. And the reason I mention that is because everything does work out for a reason. I am now, Rutgers alum, faculty, Rutgers mom, my kids there. So things do work out for the best. And because Rutgers is so fantastic and so big, whatever you're into, we have that. And I had the opportunity to participate in what's called the National Student Exchange Program, and it still exists. So whereby you pay your home tuition, which was all my parents were, concerned about, but you can attend school at a bunch of wherever. So I spent 1 year at California State University in Chico, and then I came back, and then I spent a semester at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, and then I came back. But if you looked at my transcript, my degree is from Rutgers. My undergraduate is in English, but during that semester I was in Colorado, that's where I met my future husband. So once I came back and graduated, I then moved out there. He was already in graduate school, and that's, we lived in Fort Collins for some years after that. I started my graduate program at New Mexico State University because I wrote a report on New Mexico in 3rd grade, and I was just always fascinated by it. And New Mexico at the time, I don't know if it still does, had a tuition reciprocity with Colorado, whereby if you were a Colorado resident, you could go to a New Mexico State school and pay home tuition. So that, was sort of my thing. So I was able to start at New Mexico State paying in-state tuition. Once we got engaged, I moved back to Fort Collins and finished my graduate program at Colorado State with a master's in education.
Wow. What a journey. That's incredible.
Yeah.
You've had some experience. So did you always know what you wanted to go for? Was there a time?
Oh, no. Nobody my age became a grant writer on purpose. It was just something you fell into. My original graduate program was for early childhood education because that's what I did all through college, was work in various daycare centers, preschools. In the summers, I was always a camp counselor. So I loved early childhood. It was super fun. So I taught for a year in a Montessori school right after college, and it was super fun, but I realized pretty quick that I was making $6 an hour, and that was fine for now when I was 21, 22, 23, but it wasn't a really viable long-term, career path. And we can talk about how underpaid that whole profession is, and not that it's really changed. So I couldn't see it even 20, 30 years ago changing that quickly. So I went back to graduate school, planning to get a master's in early childhood, but New Mexico had this fantastic Teacher of the Deaf program that I was accidentally sort of prepared for. So I transferred into that. And while I was down there, I needed a job, and I didn't love the early childhood center I found. So I ended up in the school district as a sub because there's not enough, first of all, there's not enough teachers of the deaf, but there's certainly not enough substitute teachers of the deaf. And it was quick and easy to get a substitute certification down there. And I was able to substitute for both the teachers of the deaf and the interpreters. So I did that. And then when I transferred to Colorado, they didn't have the exact same programs. So I transitioned into my master's in occupational special needs. So it's more general than just deaf. And I actually got rejected the first time I applied to the program because it didn't result in a teaching credential. And I was like, yeah, I know that. I'll deal with that later. Let me just get this master's now. So they let me in, and what I didn't share because I didn't know at the time was my husband was at the same time applying for a Fulbright, which he eventually got. And that's how we ended up living overseas. And I was a teacher of the deaf in Australia because they didn't require, I had a master's already, but they didn't require that same teaching credential. How we have 50 different states that do it 50 different ways. So I was properly trained to be a teacher there. And so that year, I finished my graduate program in December. We moved in January of 1996. And that year I was a teacher of the deaf in Australia while he was doing research, my husband, for his dissertation funded by Fulbright.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, one thing leads to another. Yeah.
It really does. So Australia, let's talk about that. I just spoke to someone not too long ago from Australia who's will be on the podcast. And the 14-hour difference was totally fun to try to figure out for the podcast. That was great. And I don't know if it's just Pam who talks very, very fast, but I did learn very quickly that they speak very fast. I thought coming from New York, I spoke fast, but nope, I think they speak faster than me.
Huh.
But was that true though for everybody? Maybe it was just Pam.
It is, and it was a little bit challenging because I was, a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. And my colleagues would be like, well, you have to be careful, when you're talking because of your accent. And I was a little taken aback. I'm like, my accent? I'm like, no, you mean your accent. So yeah, it was a little, by the end of every day when I would come home, I would be like, just really tired from trying to be so careful because they're both English, but the slang is so different. And the way, like the idioms and the way people talk, like it got tiring to try and make sure like you were picking with both adults and kids, the exact right word choice all the time, which again, accidentally prepared me for what I ended up doing later.
Yes, well, we're going to get to that because it's very different, very, very different than what you were doing over in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about so how long did you stay in Australia and what was your experience like there?
Just for a year, all of calendar year 1996. Their school year aligns more so with the calendar year. But I didn't have this job until we moved there. We went for my husband's research, but teachers of the deaf, there's never enough of them, no matter where. So it was relatively easy to find a job. And so we got there just in time for the new school year to start. So it worked out really well. And their school year is different in that, although it's aligned with the calendar year, their breaks are longer and more like kind of chopped up more frequently. So we got to travel during that time. So we lived in Tasmania, which is the southernmost island state off the mainland. And then on every break, we were able to travel around quite a bit. We didn't get out to Western Australia, but certainly Sydney, Canberra, Cairns, Darwin, like the middle, it's like the Red Centre and like the Great Barrier Reef up on the northeast. So we did get to see quite a bit during that year, but we had to leave by Christmas because the visas that we had was really my husband. I could have stayed, but his research visa was like time limited. So we had to leave at the end of the year, which, we did. And we had to go back to Colorado because we were there for his dissertation, which he did have to finish writing. So we went back to Colorado State and January, February is a weird time to look for a job in education. Mm-hmm. So one thing led to another, and I ended up at the Research and Development Center for the Advancement of Student Learning, which was a consortium between the school district, the community college, and the university, whereby they all put in like staff and resources into this like central research center. And that happened to be where the district parked their grants coordinator. So I was there doing research projects with some faculty I had known from my graduate program. And then the grants coordinator left and they were like, will you apply for this? I was like, I don't even know what that is, but sure. I needed a full-time job. And I was accidentally perfectly trained for it because I have a degree in English and education. And as a grant writer for a school district, it was ideal. I didn't think that the first year, but then once you get your first million, you're like, oh, and then another million, like money follows money. So then I was like, okay, maybe this is going to work out.
Your first million. That sounds so nice. That's awesome. But I have to say, so did you go back to Tasmania after that?
Yes, but only just recently. When we were there, we were just first married, and we had decided at the time that if and when we ever had a son, we would name him Tasman. And that year, on our way back around Christmas, we spent Christmas that year in French Polynesia on the island of Moorea, which is right next to Tahiti. And then a little while later, when we had children, our daughter is Moorea and our son is Taz. And so we always knew that at some point we'd have to take these children to these islands that I named them for. But it's pretty hard to take little kids on a 24-hour flight. So first we didn't have any money, and then we didn't have any time, and then we couldn't figure it out. So we finally did, and we spent Christmas there, 2019 to 2020. We took like a 3-week trip with the children. And we got back from that trip, in which we did, we flew right to Tasmania, had Christmas with our friends that we've kept in touch with. We spent New Year's in Sydney. Then we went to New Zealand, just the North Island, for a couple of days. And then Moorea on the way back, because if you look at the map, it makes sense. So we got back here in mid-January of 2020. And we are every day thankful we took that trip, because it wasn't very long after, it was just March of 2020 that the whole world went sideways, and we certainly couldn't have gone since then. And it would be even hard, even if things were more back to normal now. My daughter has since graduated college and moved on, and it would just be so much harder to schedule. So we're very thankful that we got them back to those places right before everything.
Absolutely, yeah. Timing is totally everything. But I have to say, when you told me their names, I was like, that is just such a great story of why they're named what they're named, and the fact that you took them to those places.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about the fact like you weren't able to go into a normal store and just get their name off of a
No,
place
no, not
like
their
that.
whole life.
No, but then you go into you took them to where they're named after, and they saw their name everywhere, which is had to be very cool for them.
It was very, for both of them. My son would, I mean, because Tasmania is named after an explorer, Abel Tasman. So there's the Tasman Bridge and the Tasman everything. So he took pictures all over the place. Moorea is much smaller. It's a much smaller island, much less populated, but she didn't always love her unique name. So this was very rewarding. Anytime somebody would hear her name on the island, that live there, they would be like, "What? You're a princess. Welcome home. We're so glad you're here." And everybody made a big fuss. So she was very gratified by that. So yes, it was wonderful. Thank you. Mhm.
That's really cute and so
Yeah.
special. That's awesome.
Mhm.
So now I have to go visit those islands. They sound absolutely
Oh, they're
beautiful.
fantastic. Anytime. Happy to talk you through them.
Oh, good. Thank you. Once the world stops going
Yes, maybe
side
not
world,
this year.
but
Yeah.
yeah, definitely
Mhm.
not this year. But so, okay, I agree with you 100% when it comes to nonprofit world. The nonprofit world found me. Not a lot of people wake up one day, you know what I'm saying, in high school and say, maybe more so now than back
Yes.
in our generation, which, I didn't know anybody who said, oh, I want to work in the nonprofit sector. I wish I did back then, but I didn't. But it found me, and I know and what you're sharing, it found you. So, okay, when you say, for those who are looking now and say, and maybe hearing this and say, oh, she got her first million. For
Mhm.
some of them, that might sound like, a humongous task, right? So talk a little bit about how you went about securing that first million in grants, and what was so special about the way you did it that maybe some others can learn from.
Sure. Well, the woman that had the job before me of grants coordinator, it was a fairly new position, and she had been in it maybe 2 or 3 years. And she was really focused on foundations, private foundations, and she looked a little bit at state grants, but not too much. And she was aware that there were federal grants, but she wasn't, she didn't have the capacity to really tackle them. So when I started, but there were all these newsletters at the time on paper that would talk about all these grant opportunities, and they always talked about federal ones. And I asked her, I'm like, why aren't we going for these? And she was like, because we're doing these smaller ones. I was like, okay. So once she left and I took over, I decided that we would aim higher, because limiting yourself to corporate and foundation is fine in the beginning. It's fantastic. But we were a pretty mid-sized school district. We had 42 schools. At the time, Colorado's geographically bigger. Our area, just of our school district, was like the size of Rhode Island. So it didn't make sense to me that I would just be looking for nickels and dimes. So towards the end of the first school year, there was an opportunity. It was the first year it came out, called 21st Century Community Learning Programs. It's a federal opportunity that started in 1997, and it still exists. But the intent was to provide academic remediation and enrichment after school hours, because not every kid can be done learning at 3 o'clock. Like some of them, one, need extra learning time, and two, can go home, right? So this needed to be a safe place for kids to stay after school and get help with their homework and extra help and whatever. So the program, that was the first $1 million. And just putting it together, grants are extremely technical and detail oriented. And I just happen to be good at that. Like, that's not something, when I teach grant writing seminars for community members or faculty, and I teach undergraduate and graduate sections, I can't teach that. I can teach the content and how to organize and where to find money, but that real attention to detail, that's really hard to teach. And I just happen to be good at that, at just paying attention to the details. Because it's not hard, it's just following directions, but you have to follow all of them. Absolutely. So we pulled a team together at the district level, and to everybody and my own surprise, we were awarded the money, and it was worth $1 million. And that was the biggest grant the district had ever gotten. So that one application I didn't love the job my first year. I really wanted to still be a teacher. But that award was so gratifying, and the feedback from the community and the district itself was so gratifying that I signed on for the second year, and we just really grew from that. I mean, that money follows money. So once you get that first big grant, other grants just sort of naturally follow, assuming you do everything, you're achieving your objectives and filing your reports. But for the most part, our nonprofits are very good. So the hardest part is getting that first large award.
Yeah, I think when other organizations see someone that is a trusted name in the community that signs their name to some dollars,
Yep.
it then screams at them to, maybe I need to be taking a look at this a little bit deeper. I agree. And attention to detail. I'm a firstborn too. I'm more of that control freak, but I am not. My sister, who handles that side of our nonprofit, is the attention to detail person. So thank God we have that within our own nonprofit. But yes, every I has to be dotted and T has to be crossed. And I know, from being in the nonprofit sector, so many times people can spend 12 plus hours on a grant that is never going to fit them. They're trying to make a square peg go into a round hole.
Right.
So what do you tell them, and how do they know, like, okay, this is just not worth it? What advice do you have for that?
All right. So one of my friends at one organization I work with calls me the Dream Slayer, because she'll come to me and say, hey, we should apply for this. And I'll read it and go, yeah, no, we should not apply. I spend way more time talking people out of applying than I do actually applying, because you're right. It is a lot of time and effort. And if nobody should be chasing money, everything is way too competitive. If you don't fit the guidelines perfectly, do not waste your time. There's just, right now there's a lot of money out there and it's still super competitive. I got rejected. I'm still mad. I get rejected all the time and whatever, not everything works out, but I got rejected with a 96 a month or two ago out of 100 for no reason. And I'm still kind of mad about it because we were perfectly aligned. I did try and talk them out of it, even so, because it was a federal grant and they were only making 6 nationwide. So I said to the clinical team, do you really have one of the 6 best ideas in the whole country? And they were convinced they did. But even that wasn't good enough. 96, no weaknesses noted, but still, sometimes things just aren't good enough. So in this environment, you have to really only spend what limited resources you have, both time and money, on applying for things that are a really ideal fit.
Yeah, and for those who are listening and might not understand what that 96 is, just to kind of explain a little bit about.
Yeah, so federal grants are all scored by a rubric, mostly out of 100. EPA does it slightly different, but most of the time, every section of your application is worth a designated amount of points that equal usually up to 100. And you can always get your comments back. They have to give you your scores back so you can see how you did. So I could see that we had scored a 96. Now, when I started doing this in 1997, anything above 75, definitely 80, anything above was within fundable range. Now I see people routinely getting rejected with 96s, 99s, because it's just that competitive. And so once all the scores are in, the program officers fund down the slate. So they fund like the first 100, the next 100, the next time. So if there's only hundreds getting funded before they run out of money. And then federally, the program officers have to make some consideration geographically, like all of the money can't go to one state. It has to be spread out. So sometimes a 97 will get funded before a 99 if there's already been too many funded in that one area. So there are some considerations like that that are just out of your control, which is what happened to me with this other one. New Jersey wasn't going to get the money. I just, for a whole lot of reasons. But yeah, because these things take way more than 12 hours. A federal grant application takes me at least 40, and that's just me. And I need to work with a whole team of, content experts in order to get that information. So it is a big investment in time.
Tremendous. Totally tremendous. Just a quick question to go back for a second. So did you ever go back to teaching at all?
Just recently. When I went back to Rutgers, I originally went back to Rutgers, they ran an ad looking for a grant writing instructor. So I replied to it. And when I went to the interview, it wasn't until I got to the interview, they started to ask questions and I said, well, wait, is this for an undergraduate or a graduate course? Because the ad was not clear. And they said, yes. So it's for both. So I was like, okay. So I recalibrated my answers and I started teaching at Rutgers in the fall of 2016. Just part-time, just teaching grant writing. I had an undergraduate and a graduate section. And I was like, perfect, because this fills in my gap. I had already taught every grade between K and 12, and I had taught, community members, adult learners, and faculty workshops and stuff, but I had never taught college. So now I feel complete. Now I have taught all the grade levels. Oh, and I did teach when my son was very young, and I was only consulting part-time. When I was building up my consulting practice, I did teach for the Princeton Review, high school students, obviously. So, but that I stopped doing that quite some time ago. So going back to Rutgers was my first time back in a classroom in many years.
And how about teaching for the deaf? Have you gone back?
Oh, no, I haven't done that. Not since. Nope.
Do you think, is that ever on the bucket list again, or you think that you've kind of completed that part for yourself?
I probably not. I think probably not. I did once apply to a community college to teach a writing class, and they offered it to me, but they said, but I noticed on your resume that you were an interpreter and a teacher of the deaf, and this community college does have an interpreter training program. But I thanked them and declined because my language skills are not up to par. Like, if I was going to do that again, I'd have to take a lot of refreshers, even though I do see my brother and I do talk to him, not often enough that I feel like my language skills are adequate, certainly not to teach.
I feel like that is something that you have to do consistently.
Yeah, it's like any foreign language. Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt. I know that my daughter had a true fondness wanting to do that, but then she also lost, touch with keeping up with it. And then, like you have to relearn it all. I took French for like 6 years, but I think I barely can have a conversation.
Right.
Barely. So yeah, totally get it. So for your grant writing students, what do you they come in, they're green, right? They many are taking it maybe just as a regular course just to kind of fill in. Some are actually going to go into the nonprofit sector. What would you say if you had to guess percentage wise, those who are taking your class that'll wind up in the nonprofit world compared to just taking the class just to take the class and learn?
So it's a little bit different now that I've been there. I went full-time at Rutgers in 2019. So now the students that are taking, undergraduate students that are taking grant writing tend to take it on purpose. There are a lot of upper division writing classes that fulfill that upper division writing requirement. And I also teach some of the others, like this semester, I have 2 sections of scientific and technical writing, which they tend to be STEM majors that just have to take a writing class. And so they end up in there. The people that end up in grants kind of do so on purpose. Either somebody told them about it, or their mom thinks it'd be a great idea, or their friends took it. Or I do get a lot of scientists who are undergraduate researchers who are going to be going into graduate school and know that this is a skill they'll need. But of those, I'd say now maybe at 75% of them take it on purpose. But there are still those that don't. And even the ones that took it on purpose don't really know what they've gotten into. They don't realize the breadth of the sector. There are 38,000 nonprofits just in New Jersey. Like, they are shocked, like that's a lot. And at the end of the semester, when we do our course evaluations, many of them are like, thank you, that I did not even know this whole other world existed. Like, they may have heard of grants, but they didn't really have good context for it. And so many of them now in the past 5 years have joined me in the field. I'm always thrilled when they do. It's not always the people I would pick out on the first week of class. Like, if I were to guess, it's not always those people. It's frequently not. And sometimes I don't know until a while. I recently got a message on LinkedIn from a former student who had graduated. And when he took class with me, his plan was very clear. He was going to grad school. He was going to get a PhD in math. And he was like super into it. That's what he was going to do. Okay, so I wished him well. He did well in my class, and whatever. So I get this LinkedIn message from him, do you remember me? And I did. It was a few years ago. He said, well, I am going to law school. I doing an internship at Pro Bono Legal Partners. This class changed my life. I'm working with newly arrived immigrants, helping them through the legal system. He's like, I just want to thank you. This was the best thing. And I have a lot of students like that ended up doing something just totally unexpected because we open their eyes. Because I say we, because you and all of our colleagues that I use as resources and guest speakers for those classes really are, changing the trajectory of their life.
Thank you. I told my daughter to take a grant writing class when she was in college, and she's a film major. But if you're going to write films, on certain topics, you can absolutely go for certain grants. So it's I think it's important for anyone. I never did, I was one of those,
Either.
fly by the seat of your pants,
Mhm.
thrown into the nonprofit world, trial by fire. But it would have been so much better to go the
Oh,
other route.
absolutely. And I teach at Rutgers, and I tell my students all the time, I'm in a division of English business and technical writing. I don't even know if that was there when I was there, because I would have never thought to sort it out. I just when I like to read. So I was like, all right, I'll major in English. Um, and I took all of my English courses where it would have been like in literature. Like it never would have occurred to me to look for some, and like we have a class called business and professional writing, which would be benefit everybody in the whole world. Like it would have never occurred to me to take something so useful at the time. My students are much more on top of things. They're much more career focused, future focused. I was just happy to get through the day, the week, the semester.
Yeah, totally different, when we were going to
Very.
school as opposed
Mhm.
to what they're doing right now. The
Mhm.
nonprofit sector in general has gone through so much, just like everybody has since the pandemic. It's been up, it's
Mhm.
been down. And if you were frontline,
Yeah.
the grants were plentiful
Mhm.
and continue to be that way. And if you weren't, as we know, I'm performing arts nonprofit. That's what it's not as fruitful. At times it can be, depends upon who you're writing to.
Yes.
So for those who are not frontline,
Mhm.
as we're moving into this unknown, none of us have this crystal ball of what 2022 is going to look like. What are your, in your expertise, what are your thoughts on nonprofits as we move into 2022 and funding?
All right. So you presented two extremes, right? I do a lot of healthcare. So from the second we were sent home, I went, uh-oh, because I could tell all the money was going to go there. So it was super chaotic for like a year. We were so just responsive, like forget strategic, forget proactive. All we could do was respond, because they were literally throwing money at us, which was great because my hospitals are first, obviously front line, but that money had to come from somewhere else. So what was a lot of money was directed toward healthcare and to food, like the food banks made out all right, because they had a huge spike in need, which everybody sort of got like, oh, people are out of work. Yeah, they'll be hungry. So money followed that. And then you also brought up performing arts organizations. The arts organizations took it the worst because they were forced to close, so they had no income. They did a nice pivot. I really enjoyed all of the online content, but that's certainly not making up for people in seats, right? How long was Broadway closed? Unprecedented. And Broadway at, the upper extreme, but every kind of performing arts. And when you looked at now at the recovery, the sectors that are recovering the quickest are, just as you would expect, healthcare right away, because healthcare took a hit as well, because all of our elective procedures had to stop, right? We were only dealing with COVID in the hospitals. But they're recovering. Whereas performing arts was the last sector to open and is the last sector to recover. And although there have been designated opportunities just for performing arts, Save Our Stages and whatnot, it's not enough to recover everything that was lost.
Right.
I don't think the die-off will be as bad as we expected. At one point, we anticipated a third of nonprofits closing. I don't think it'll be that high, but I think we'll know more as 2021 ends and we see who's still standing in 2022.
Yeah. We didn't have a venue. So, and our organization was so uniquely different. So we really didn't have, thank goodness,
Mhm.
we didn't have that huge drop off. Like it
Mhm.
was like one day everything shut down. And for us, it was, we were moving forward and ahead, everything online.
Mhm.
So I think the organizations that supported us before saw that. But for those who didn't, the doors shut, and so did everything else. You do have your own consulting business. You do a lot with healthcare. You work directly and you teach.
Yeah.
But in the consulting business that you have on your own, who are your clients, and who are your clients? But I'm going to ask this in a two-part question. But also, who is your ideal client?
So I work with a lot of non-healthcare since I'm a staff grant writer for RWJ. So anything I do in consulting is not healthcare related. It tends to be a lot of education since that's really my first love. I work with a lot of boys and girls clubs across the country. I have a YW that I'm not writing for directly now, but I'm good friends with and keep an eye on. If they have a special project, I'm happy to jump in. Mostly stuff like that. I do have another arts organization that I try and help out when I can. Human service organizations. That's mostly it. I did some EPA for a while, but mostly education, human services, I'd say. And my ideal client is just the one that's responsive, that sends me the information in a timely fashion, that doesn't call me and say, can you help me? This is due Friday. Yeah, no, like my schedule is really tight. So I'm happy to slot things in, but I need enough of a heads up that I can actually do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for us, and I've had these conversations myself with you as well, it's like all of a sudden you find out about something and
Yeah,
they
that
make
happens.
the due date. The due date is all of a sudden next week, and you're like, wait a minute, it just came out. How did that happen? So
And that's
that,
just worse and worse. When I started doing this, every federal grant application gave you like 8 weeks. Now, sometimes they're down to like 4, and it's not reasonable, but we do it. We turn things around quick. And, right now there's so much COVID money, like in the trillions, and it's being funneled through the states. So it's being administered like 50 different ways. So it is still super chaotic, and they're just the states have to get it off their books. So they're pushing it out the door, but you have to be cautious when you're applying and taking that money, because the regulations are following the money instead of the other way around. So it's, a little bit, you have to be a little bit cautious with how much money you're taking, public money, because they will catch up. Like all of those reporting requirements will catch up to you, and you will have to document stuff that states now are like, whatever, just apply, we'll deal with it later. Like later will come. So if you are getting any COVID money, anybody, I would recommend keep meticulous documentation, twice as much as you normally think you would, like every time and effort sheet you can imagine, every invoice, every receipt, because at some point you will have to document where the legislature Congress will want to document where every dollar went.
yeah. And in the nonprofit world, we know how short-staffed everybody is. And so
Yes.
that always goes to the wayside. We'll get to it. We'll figure it out. We'll put all the receipts and everything on this side, and then they disappear. So it is really important to make sure that you get somebody's who's going to be responsible for it. And unfortunately, it just gets added. Another hat gets added on.
One more thing for somebody to do. Absolutely.
So 60 million, right? That's around.
Ish. I kind of stopped counting at like 50, like for real. And so 60-ish.
So when those grants come in now, I mean, you're at a number that's pretty.
Oh no, it's still rewarding though.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Like, is 25,000 still as rewarding as it used to be? Or is it really just those millions now for you?
No, it depends, because the amount of money that would be transformational for your smaller nonprofit doesn't mean much to my hospitals. For them, yes, it needs to be in the millions in order for anybody to notice. But it just depends, because sometimes, yeah, like 25 or 50 is 10,000 was super rewarding. A couple months ago that a friend texted me that she got. It just depends on the organization and the need and the application. Sometimes it's not the size, it was the fact that they only made 8 awards nationwide. So right there, that our project was recognized as the most, the 8 best ideas in the country. So it's not always about the size.
And I think the important thing to note here, Stacey, for yourself, and I'm sure you've thought of this, is that you truly are a change maker by helping to raise those funds. The incredible programs that you have been able to launch and the people that these programs have impacted. They may never know a Stacey Abate, but without you and people who do your type of work, there's so many programs out there that would not happen. So as much as it's a rewarding job, it can also, you're the behind the scenes person.
Yeah, which suits me. My name doesn't really go on anything. I don't get, it's not like I get a percentage of any of those grants. Like, no, it's just personally satisfying to know that the grants that I work on fund salaries of doctors, nurses, social workers, all those frontline people you're talking about. Especially now, mental health is so huge, because everybody's so traumatized over the last 2 years. Substance abuse is way up. I work with a substance abuse organization. We just got $5 million. That was super rewarding, because I know what the need is in those areas for which we wrote it for. So yeah, no, I'm happy to be behind the scenes, but I'm also happy to know that I am contributing, truly to making a difference. And that's the same point, Jody, I try to point out to my students, like the work that we do in here matters. Like my projects, when I say doctors and nurses, I mean like I write for an HIV program that are like working with really high risk people. Like if that grant goes away, those are like 7 full-time positions that would not be available for this really high medical need population. So yeah, no, the work definitely matters.
Oh, it totally does matter. So, a question I always love to ask on this podcast is, if you knew then what you know now,
Yeah.
what
So
would
I
that
thought
be?
about that I heard you mention to somebody else, and I was like, huh. So I think my answer is just like, I would not have worried so much, because things do work out the way they are meant to. You may not always see the path, but if you have faith that you're on the right path, even if you can't quite tell, things do work out.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a worrier. So if I could have told myself to just worry less, if I could tell myself that now, I would still appreciate it. Yeah.
Right, because in 20 years, right, we'll be saying that we shouldn't have worried.
Yeah, I wish I hadn't worried so much. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if I thought about what some of the common denominators were, or common answers were, it's a lot of that for the worry piece for the guests that have on. All so successful, all making a difference, but they had so much time spent on the worry that it just seems to happen. And I guess if we had less time to worry, who knows what would happen, right? Because obviously everybody made it. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think it would just be less wear and tear in our body.
Absolutely.
Who needs all of that? So before I get to the very last question, I do want to ask you something. For those who are looking at starting a nonprofit, they're just in the thought process right now. They're excited, they're passionate, that they have a great mission. Any really great advice you could give them?
A couple of things. When I said there were 38,000 nonprofits in New Jersey, I meant it. That was like an actual count. There are 1.6 million nationwide. And it's not that easy to start a nonprofit. So before you do, check. Is there somebody already doing a similar mission and would make more sense for you to collaborate instead of compete? Because all of those organizations are competing for the same finite amount of dollars. So everybody wants ownership and wants their own project, and I get that. But it would make more sense to work together. Well, that's my number one thing.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, but I might have to come back to it.
No, that's not a problem. Yeah, no, that's not a problem. So if you weren't doing this work right now, yeah, go ahead.
I remember.
No.
But if you're really set and you really do want to start, if you're in New Jersey, the Center for Nonprofits, the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits is an invaluable resource. They have a page right on their website called something like, oh, you're thinking of starting a nonprofit. And there are all these resources for you. And if you're not in New Jersey, our center is a member organization of the National Council of Nonprofits, and they have those same resources at a more national level, and in almost every state has their own sort of center. So I would absolutely direct you there. It's the number one place I recommend everybody visit.
If you weren't doing the work that you're doing now, what would have been that second choice? Like, what do you feel like would have been it? Would it have been the teaching with?
Yeah, I would have stayed as I'm happy teaching at any grade level. So I would have been happy still teaching, but it wasn't meant to be. I was meant to be doing this.
Yeah. This is a question I get asked a lot from people that I work with at the NJBIA, the nonprofits throughout the state. Grant writers are not as common as everybody thinks they are. Like, people are searching. Like, your students don't realize how truly lucky, if they go into this field, they will be sought after. And that's something I'm sure you tell them all the time.
Pretty much weekly, yes. Because I get calls from people all the time, like, can you help me? Like, nope, I can't. I am full up, and I will try and help you find a person, whether it's a full-time staff person or a consultant, but there's just not enough of us. In our New Jersey chapter, we have about 60 members right now. Only about a third, so that'd be like 20 people, do consulting and are taking on new projects. And of those 20, depending on your project, some will be better suited for it than others. And some of them are full up and just can't take on one more project. And for trying right now, I'm trying to help a couple of friends, VPs and CEOs find staff grant writers, which is also really hard because there's not enough of us. And like everything else, everybody's having a hard time right now because salaries do need to come up to compensate people more fairly than we were maybe accustomed to before. So there's a bunch of factors like in every other industry, but generally there's just not enough grant writers.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, I've worked with 40 students this semester, 20 in 2 different sections, and I'm like, come on. But of those 40, there's really only a small percentage that have that attention to detail and would be interested in that real technical skill. I'll be curious to see when the semester's over, who follows up with me, because I have some ideas, but I can't quite say yet. And I do share with them job opportunities all the time, not that they're ready for them, but just so that they know kind of what's out there and what the salaries are and where the work is and what it entails.
Absolutely. It's so time consuming at the level of a CEO or an ED to be sitting and doing the writing. And if you can find someone who has the time and also, like you said, it's their skill set. It is so much better to be able to pass it on. But I will say it is an expensive skill set. It's truly for a nonprofit.
Correct.
Worth
But
it.
I just said to someone the other day, like, okay, I get it. 'Cause she is a CEO and she is trying to apply for a 21st century, the one that I mentioned, my first million. I still work with that program, and apply for different nonprofits every year. And so there's a CEO of an organization who's writing it herself, and it's not going well. And I said, I'm like, I get it. You don't have 50, 60,000, 70,000 to devote to a full-time staff person. I was like, but even if you could set aside 5 or 10,000 just for these special projects each year, because she's going to lose out on, I think I haven't seen her budget yet, but several $100,000 for lack of that 5,000 to spend on a special project. So it is an investment that is, the return on investment that was always my goal. It still is. When I'm hired as a staff person, first thing I want to do is make sure I make my salary back. And then, which I always do, like 10, 20-fold, because it is, an investment in your organization, investment in the future, and money follows money. So once you pay somebody and they bring you that first kind of big chunk of money, other money will follow.
Right. It is hard. And being, coming from a smaller nonprofit, it is hard because you could pay someone for grants and nothing comes in. Like you said, you're 96 out of 100 and you're thinking this was going to be funded. This is a no brainer. And then all of a sudden you might have paid somebody $4,000 and it didn't come in, and there's nothing they can do. There is.
But it's still not a waste. Every grant is worth writing, even the ones you don't get, because now you have that document and you can build on it for the next application.
Yeah, and I want to vouch for that because I totally agree with that. 150.
It forces you to get stuff on paper that really just existed in your head or in random people's heads. Like a good grant writer, I tell my clients all the time, you talk, I type. And as you're talking, I'm reorganizing what you're saying into, more coherent language for that proposal that you are then able to use for any other proposal. So it's still an investment.
I totally agree with you 100%. I've done that. You and I have chatted about things. So it's a wonderful process. If you're with the right person, it should be a wonderful process. So last question today for you is, what is the footprint that you would like to leave behind, or the mark you would like to make in this great big world?
So the answer, a couple of years ago, you mentioned that I was, my national professional organization is the Grant Professionals Association. Our New Jersey chapter, I co-founded in 2006 with, a colleague who's since retired. And I was the founding president for some years. And now I'm the current vice president. And the way I see my work with the GPA answers your question, in that it was always my personal mission to bring as much money to my nonprofits as possible. But as a representative of NJGPA, my mission is to do that, but to New Jersey. New Jersey only gets back a fraction of what we send to DC in terms of tax dollars every year. We only get a fraction of that back. So it is my mission to bring more of it back to our nonprofits, to our local state, for the betterment of the people here. So I think that's the answer, is that the programs that I've worked on, the projects that I work on, make a difference in regular people's lives, right? It benefits, as I tell my students, every school, municipality, nonprofit, hospital in this country uses a grant writer. And the impacts of that work are seen in anytime you take your kids. My local farmers market was created by a USDA grant. So everything you do was in some way impacted. Our hospitals rely on grants for a lot of their programs. Municipalities, Department of Transportation grants, FEMA for disaster recovery. Like, you have to be able to access that, and all of those grants impact your daily life.
Oh, absolutely. That was so great. And all the work you're doing, like I said, although the people in don't see your name or know, but the back work that's happening is just really incredible. And it's because of you and those of you who are teaching and that next generation coming up.
Here's hoping.
Yes, they're going to make tremendous impact because
Mhm.
they want you to. You know, and I think the other piece is it's that grant writing might not be for all of them, but the
Mm-mm.
one thing they'll learn from you no matter what is the importance of community and community service and giving
Yes.
back.
And that they do. I teach a class called Writing for Nonprofits, which is not about grants. It's about everything else you need, right? Like marketing materials, annual giving, newsletters. And so although it's very different, the concept is the same. There are all these nonprofits and they need your help. So, yep, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any last thoughts you'd like our listeners to hear before we go?
Yeah, grants are daunting, but they're not unachievable, right? Follow the directions. It's always worth your time and investment to pursue. You know, some people you want to have that like a balanced revenue stream. So you want to have from individual donors and all your fundraising and such, but grants should be a part of that revenue stream. There's no reason if you can follow the directions, you can do this.
Absolutely. And yes, because we can no longer rely on events as a total revenue stream.
Yeah. And events are not my area of expertise. So, but grants are, and they should be a part of your revenue stream.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Stacey, thank you so much for sharing all that you
Jody,
did.
thank you. And thank you. You mentioned at the beginning that we met because of an NJBIA workshop that I did, but I also met quite a few other people at that workshop who have since been guest speakers in my class. So thank you very much for your impact.
Oh, I'm so glad. Good.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I didn't know that. So I'm glad that they
Yeah.
were able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that and giving them that opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. My students do appreciate hearing from people. They say the same thing I do, but the people that are actually working in the field, I think it means something a little different coming from somebody actually doing those direct services. So thank you so much.
No problem. So I'm going to say what I say at the end of every podcast. Today is the day. You cannot go back to yesterday, and you do not yet own tomorrow. So what are you doing today to take that one small or large step to get yourself closer to your goal? Thank you so much to Stacey Abate for being a guest this week. And I'll see you next week on the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. Bye, everybody. Bye,
Thanks,
Stacey.
Jody. Thank you.